Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what I'd honestly call a real-life medical detective story. Did you know that in nearly 80% of nagging sports injuries, the place where it actually hurts is completely different from the actual source of the problem? That's wild. Today, we're looking at a specific athlete, a boxer, who's been dealing with this awful, persistent, right-sided hip and back pain. Now, naturally, when your back hurts, you treat the back, right? But what happens when the pain you're feeling is stemming from a completely hidden, surprising source? We're going to decode the biomechanics of this injury, figure out exactly what went wrong in her training, and then walk through the exact data-driven roadmap her strength coach used to fix it. Get ready, because understanding this concept could completely change how you view your own nagging injuries.
Okay, let's just dive right in. We've got a very clear roadmap today. First, we'll look at the kinetic chain leak. Second, tracing the root cause. Third, the Pilates backfire. And finally, the three-phase recovery roadmap.
All right, Section 1, the kinetic chain leak. So, to really wrap our heads around what's happening with our athlete, we kind of have to reframe her whole struggle. She's dealing with sharp pain in her right sacroiliac or SI joint and a hip flexor that just keeps giving out. To solve this mystery, we have to ask a really counterintuitive question. Why did a core workout make her back pain worse? Just think about that for a second. We're literally always told that a strong core protects the back. So why did targeted core training actually trigger a massive flare-up for her? Keep this question in the back of your mind, because the answer is the absolute key to our entire rehab process.
Well, it all boils down to this concept of a kinetic chain leak. Basically, this is a biomechanical failure where a previous injury creates these downstream compensation patterns, forcing totally unrelated muscles to overwork. So, in the case of our boxer, her current hip flexor pain, it's not actually a hip flexor problem at all. It's just her body desperately trying to substitute for a massive lack of pelvic stability. Force and energy are literally leaking out of her kinetic chain, and our hip flexor is stepping in to do a job it was never, ever designed to do.
Moving right along to Section 2, tracing the root cause.
Let's go back and investigate how this all built up. Basically, investigating the biomechanical crime scene across her injury timeline. So years ago, this athlete suffered an L4 disc bulge in her lumbar spine. Now, when your lumbar spine has a disc issue, your deep stabilization system, specifically the transversus abdominis and the multifidus, which basically act like your body's internal corset, often just goes completely dormant due to neurological inhibition. The brain literally shuts them off to protect the spine. Later on, because that deep core corset isn't anchoring her pelvis anymore, her nervous system just stops firing her glutes efficiently. This is a condition known as glute amnesia. Fast forward to the present day. Without the core and glutes doing their actual jobs, her lower back muscles are forced to hyper-compress just to make up for that lack of stability. It's basically a chronological cascade of biomechanical failure.
You can really see the stark contrast happening inside her body here. On one side, we have this completely dormant, deep core. Her primary stabilizers are essentially asleep at the wheel. But on the other side, we have these hyperactive compensators. Her lower back and right hip flexor are working absolute overtime. Because the core isn't properly anchoring the pelvis, the nervous system flat out refuses to fire those powerful glute muscles efficiently. It's like this massive internal tug of war where the completely wrong muscles are winning.
Now let's connect this microanatomy back to the macro goal, which is boxing. Boxing is all about massive, intense rotational force, right? Well, if you try to generate that kind of torque without a locked-in core and active glutes, that force doesn't just magically disappear. It has to go somewhere, and it travels straight down into a right SI joint. This creates intense shear stress and this sharp, stabbing pain every time she moves. Her foundation is completely unanchored, so the rotational force of a punch is actively tearing at her weakest link.
Which brings us to a pretty surprising plot twist. Section 3, the Pilates backfire.
This is a crucial turning point in her story. When the pain flared up, she really tried to do the right thing. But as her instructor noted, she needed Pilates, conceptually correct, but too much, too soon. And hey, a lot of you watching have probably been in this exact scenario. You're in pain, a friend suggests a great core workout like Pilates, and you just jump right in. Her instructor actually hit the nail on the head. She absolutely, desperately needed core work. But jumping straight into an advanced class, that was a critical error for her specific biomechanical state. You see, context is absolutely everything in rehab. Advanced Pilates introduces these really complex, long lever movements and significant spinal flexion and rotation. And honestly, sometimes those reformer machines look like medieval stretch racks. Remember, she has an unanchored pelvis and a totally dormant deep core. Her body simply couldn't handle those advanced movements yet. So, instead of isolating the core, actually scratch that because she couldn't isolate her core, her lower back and her overworked hip flexors immediately took over to fight for stability. She accidentally reinforced the exact compensation pattern she was trying to cure.
All right, so how do we actually fix this? Section 4, the 3-phase recovery roadmap. To fix this without causing another backfire, we have to rely on a strictly data-driven roadmap. Here is the mandatory sequential progression her coach laid out. Phase 1 is all about static capacity baselines. Phase 2 introduces sagittal plane loading. And only when she's ready does she hit Phase 3, rotational integration. She absolutely cannot skip steps here. She has to prove her body can handle baseline stability before she is ever allowed to throw full power punches again without risking a setback.
Let's quickly break down Phase 1. Before she even thinks about touching a heavyweight or doing complex footwork, she has to pass these static tests. We're talking a strict forearm plank for 1 to 1.5 minutes. And to fix that lateral pelvis instability, she must hold a side plank for 45 to 60 seconds per side. These are the absolute minimum static benchmarks required just to prove her deep core is actually turning back on.
But alongside those planks, she also has to cure that glute amnesia we talked about earlier. The protocol here calls for daily exercise snacks. These are basically high-rep, low-load isolation exercises done frequently throughout the day. We're talking mini-band lateral walks, monster walks, clamshells, low-load hip extensions. The goal isn't to build massive, bulging muscles here. It's simply to wake up that neuromuscular connection so her brain actually remembers how to talk to her glutes again.
And the crucial point for all of this, the magic number is literally 0. She must achieve exactly 0 SI joint pain and 0 hip flexor pain while hitting those Phase 1 baselines. If there's any pain at all, it means the compensators are still taking over. Until that pain is at a hard 0 during those tests, she is not allowed to move forward. Objective data rules the day here.
Once she passes Phase 1 with 0 pain, boom, she graduates to Phase 2. The goal now is sagittal plane loading. This means we're building glute and hamstring hypertrophy using linear, bilateral loads. Symmetrical movements, right? Think Romanian deadlifts, glute bridges, goblet squats. These exercises build massive lower body strength while keeping the pelvis perfectly stable, introducing exactly 0 rotational shear to that vulnerable SI joint.
Finally, once she's fully pain-free in Phase 2, she enters the last stage, Phase 3, rotational and unilateral integration. Now we can finally add asymmetric movements, split squats, single-legged deadlifts, and cable rotations like the Pallof press, which safely target that deep internal corset. Notice how these specific movements perfectly mimic the physical demands of a split boxing stance. This final phase makes sure her hips can safely transfer force without leaking any of that kinetic energy back into her lower back.
By following this strictly structured path, she isn't just slapping a band-aid on the pain, she's completely rewiring her movement patterns so she can return to boxing even stronger than before. Which really leaves me with a question for you to think about regarding your own training. Are you actually treating the root cause of your pain, or are you just endlessly fighting a downstream compensation? Next time you have a persistent nagging injury, remember this boxer's story. Look for your own kinetic chain leaks, and always demand an objective baseline before you start building. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.